So I called this talk Making Sense of Toronto's Budget Process, and I want to introduce myself first. I have been co-organizing with Civic Tech Toronto since about, well, like, let's say 2018, but really since 2020. So I've been here for a long time. But in my day-to-day, I work for a city councillor doing like communications and policy and constituency work. So everything from writing up statements on really big policy pieces to helping someone figure out how to get their garbage picked up because they missed it by accident. Because that is the life of us in city council offices, which is very exciting. This year, my counselor is on the budget committee, so I've been a little bit closer to the budget committee for the budget on the whole than we were last year. But the title's a little bit misleading because I haven't made sense 100% of Toronto's budget because it's really, really big. So that is my intro. I work for, just for a little bit of context, my counselor is Councillor Amber Morley, who is the city councillor for Etobicoke Lakeshore, which is the very southwest of the city. But just as we get started, I do want to do a little disclaimer, which is I'm here on behalf of me, not on behalf of my office. So I'm really hoping that this talk stays very like practical. What is the budget? How can you get involved? To some extent, like how do we get here? But I also don't really have a handle on all that either. So I kind of want to take time to talk through an overview of the proposed 2024 budget, go through like what's the operating budget, what's the capital plan and budget, how we fund those at a very high level, because I'm not going to lie to you, it's hard to condense this into 15 minutes. And then talk about the process, where we are in it, and how you can get involved in it. And then after this talk is over, we'll have a little Q&A, and even after that, we'll go into a breakout. And I've brought some printouts of a specific budget note around technology services, which I think probably we're mostly going to be interested in looking at. So we can sit down and go through that together if you want. If you're like, I've had enough budget, you also don't have to. So for some of you who are more familiar with budgets, this is like the building blocks of what it means to look at Toronto's budget. It's really broken into two parts. And so my chief of staff says operating budget is people and capital budget is things. That's like a little bit perhaps oversimplified when you look a little closer, but it helps to kind of direct how you think about these. So operating budget is a one-year plan to deliver city services and programs. And that's things like recreation programs, waste and recycling collection, city, childcare, public health. And then the capital budget, you can think about that as the capital assets needed to deliver those services. And we plan that out in Toronto, we do it over 10 years. So you can get a sense of what we're really budgeting for putting into place in 2024 and how we see those assets progressing and the funding progressing for the next 9 years following that. And so think about buildings, equipment, roads and transit networks, water and wastewater facilities, kind of, et cetera. And to make this like really tangible, think about you on the weekend are going to a city skating rink and you're going to drop in hours. And so what falls under the operating budget is all of the people it takes to maintain that ice, open that rink up. And then the capital budget would be, what does it take to like have that rink on the whole? What does it take to build it? What does it take to maintain it? So the 2024 budget for Toronto, the budget goal overall is to get the city back on track to a financially stable and sustainable future. And every time you see one of these little blue slides that says budget TO on the top corner, I've pulled these right out of the city deck. It's about 70 something slides long. So I didn't want to take us through the whole 70. But I'm also going to link to that later, like in the Slack, I'll send you the whole deck because there's a lot more where that came from. So our operating budget for 2024, proposed value here is 17 billion, and then the capital budget and plan over 10 years, 49.8 billion. And there's a lot of work that's gone into getting us here. And I don't have time to go in depth, but we have an updated long-term financial plan, which the city put in place to look at really building out a sustainable financial future for Toronto over a period of 3 years. So this budget is the first of 3 budgets that ideally will get us to a sustainable budget by 2026. We also did fall budget consultations. When I say we, actually, I mean the mayor, the budget chief, and the city staff. From November 1st to November 30th, we did an online survey that had about 11,000 responses, as well as 16 drop-in sessions across the city. I think we got just under 700 people came out to that. So we got pretty good engagement. It's the first time that we've done these fall budget consultations in a long time. So this year we're really looking to like bring the public's voice into it because it is a really difficult year. It's a really difficult budget. We also have this new deal agreement between Ontario and Toronto, which is really exciting. And we've got an associated, like the province has given us money for different operating and capital budgets. And we also did a ton of review and preparation. So I personally sat in on some of the reviews through November with my councillor because we're on the budget committee. Just like the number of hours that's put in by financial planning staff. Every single division has staff as well that prepare their division, agency, corporation budgets and submit those. It's a whole scenario. There's a lot of time that goes into this. And the objective at the end of the day is just maintaining core services and service levels. Okay, not a lot about the budget, but we're gonna go deeper. So this is the operating budget. So if you'll remember, that's like people. So that's delivering services day to day. And this is over 1 year. And I'll talk a little bit to you might have heard in like the news, or if you're digging in, you'll see that we have this $1.8 billion of opening pressures. Dig into like what is an opening pressure. So just to give you a sense of how, I'm sorry, this is so small for those of you in person. The scale of funding that different divisions get. And this is the net budget, which means you're taking the total amount that you would have to spend to deliver that, subtracting any revenue that's generated, so like user fees. So we have TTC on the very left here, TTC and Wheel-Trans. So this is the total amounts to deliver services at the TTC minus everything that's coming in terms of fares or other revenue generating tools at the TTC. So you can see TTC on the left, there's about $1.2 billion to keep that running. The police, we have just under $1.2 billion. Affordable housing and shelters is coming in just under $1 billion. And then it's all less and less from there. Something interesting here on the very right, you'll see planning and development at 10 million. And I was like, 10 million, that's wild. We run our whole planning. No, actually it's because the city planning department should be relatively self-sustaining because we get application fees from developers when they submit applications that in an ideal world would fund our development, our whole city planning department. So there's little fun things that you can't know by looking at the numbers. But when you start to look into the numbers, you'll start to like have those questions. So opening pressures, in an average year pre-pandemic, so 2015 to 2019, we would be looking at about, let's say, $600 million of opening pressures. So that's about a third of what we're facing this year. But I want to kind of let you know what opening pressures is first of all. So take last year's budget, 2023, what we spent to deliver all of our city services, build out all of our city assets. And let's say this year we wanted to do the exact same thing again, and you take that as a baseline, what it cost in 2019, the first increase to that cost is inflation. So it naturally is going to cost more to deliver services in terms of salaries, in terms of, you know, let's say you have a food service in a building, that food's going to cost more this year. So there's a natural increase in that budget just due to inflation. Then on top of that, you want to put growth. So you can consider growth in terms of expanding programs. You can think about this year, we're expanding the community crisis response service, which is very exciting. We're expanding that out citywide. So that's going to be a cost of growth. Also within growth is our growing population. So what does it cost to deliver services to a larger city year over year? Over the last 4 years, we had COVID-19 pressures. Look how big they are. So that's huge. That's like additional cost to deliver transit with a lower ridership. So we're seeing like a much lower revenue for TTC, which means as a city, we have to pay more to deliver the same service. Increased demand on shelters. And through 2020 to 2022, I believe we did see like money coming in from the federal and the provincial level to help us offset some of that cost. Going forward, we don't have that funding. So what that looks like this year is called sustained pandemic impacts. So it does make it a little bit difficult to compare the 2023 budget with the 2024 budget, because basically everything that we used to call COVID impacts, we've now absorbed into the baseline. So when you think about Everything that Toronto Public Health has to do now in terms of COVID response, that's now part of their baseline budget that they're not seeing funding from other levels of government anymore. So it's just an additional cost to the city over what we would have spent in, say, 2019. Okay, capital plan and budget. This one, 10-year time span, all of the big city projects. I'm very eyes tight to my ward. So in my ward, we have the new Toronto Co Civic Center, which is a big crown jewel of the West. I'm very excited about that. So that falls within the capital plan, and that's 49.8 billion over 10 years. And that's kind of split up in this way where we're spending about 29% for water, 24% for transit. So that's things like buying and maintaining TTC, buses, trains, etc. And then housing and transportation, boop, boop, boop. So we're buying all these things, we're providing all these services, but how are we paying for it? It's very complicated, but I'm going to tell you about three very important things. So property tax is a very big component of this. It sounds simple, property assessment value multiplied by the property tax rate. But the property assessment value is determined by MPAC, which is the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, which is actually a provincial entity. And the property assessment value is not the same as what the market value of your house is. And maybe you all know this, but I'm not going to lie to you. When I started the budget process last year, I didn't know this because I don't own property. So in 2024, because, and I'll read the little blurb on the bottom, so I'm giving you the exact facts. As the province postponed the 2021 reassessment indefinitely, 2024 property values are the same assessed values as 2020, which uses a valuation date of January 1st, 2016. So essentially, all of our property values are indexed back to 2016 at this point. So the average home in Toronto actually has an assessed value of about $700,000, which can barely get you a condo in the city today, which is crazy because it has not even been 10 years, but we're here. And this means that next year, if we go forward and we approve this property tax increase as it is in the budget right now, the average home would be looking at a $39,040 property tax bill for the year. And what that kind of breaks down to in terms of the big expenses, it's about $700. Out of that, around $4,000 that go towards police services, around $550 of that goes to transit. Let's see, yeah, $373 goes to fire and paramedic services. So the biggest things that your property tax bill pays for are police services and transit. And if you are a renter and you're like, I don't pay property tax, I don't have to worry about it. Don't worry, it's built into your rent. So you are paying property tax, so you should worry about it. Okay, let's go a little deeper. It gets even more confusing. The property tax rate is not a flat rate. It's not so simple as just saying everyone's paying the same thing. It depends on, you'll see on the left there, description, which is type of property that you are looking at paying tax on, so residential, multi-residential, commercial, industrial, etc. They all have their own individual tax rates. And then if you look all the way to that right column, total tax rate is all three of the little property tax rates that add up to be your total tax rates. So city tax rate is just general property tax. And that goes towards our operating budget. The city building fund is a separate kind of column here that goes towards capital. So it's city building fund because it's building out the infrastructure of the city. And then the education tax rate, which is set by the province, and we kind of scoop it out of your property tax and then send it off to the province. So don't worry about that too much. And for residential properties, and this is probably the numbers that you've seen in the news, there's a proposed increase by 9% to the city tax rate, or that would go towards the city tax rate, and that looks like $33.21 annually for the average home, and the proposed increase by 1.5% would go towards the city building fund, which is about $53 annually for the average home. So that's property taxes. We have another type of programs that's called rate-supported programs. We only have 3 of them. They're funded almost entirely by user fees. So the idea is the service delivery is paid for by the residents depending on how much they're using, depending on how much they need. So that is solid waste management, so all of your garbage pickup, recycling, green bins, Toronto Parking Authority, and Toronto Water. And this budget proposes rate increases of 3% for Toronto Water and solid waste management services, which, based on my understanding, is just like a little bit below inflation. So that's kind of, it is what it is. I'm not going to tell you my opinions on anything unless you ask me in secrets. And then cost shared services, I think, are worth noting as well, because the cost of several city services are shared between the city and other orders of government. So where we share responsibility for example, things that are shared between the city and the province of Ontario are shelters, daycare, emergency medical services, public health, and income support programs, because they're responsibilities that kind of live between two levels of government, and we just have to work together to deliver those services to residents of Toronto. Okay, I know I didn't tell you everything, but that's all I have time for. So how can you get involved in the budget this year? Because there are still some opportunities. So looking at the kind of schedule for this year's budget, public consultations in November already happened. They went really well. The budget launched on January 10th, which is when you would have started seeing in the news some of the real numbers. We have today through Thursday, my councillor as well as the other councillors on the budget committee are going through presentations from every single division, agency, and corporation and reviewing things with a closer eye. And so if you have any specific questions around specific divisions or how they've allocated their budget, if you want a councillor who's on the budget committee to ask some of those questions, now is the time to send them, hey, can you follow up with, I can't remember who's tomorrow, but thing about this question you have, that's always on the table. Also, this evening, tomorrow evening, and Thursday, the mayor and the budget chief, Shelley Carroll, are hosting telephone town halls, which are kind of cool. Literally, all you have to do is call in. There's a phone number online. If you go to Toronto.ca/budget, it will tell you, get involved, and you click that, and it's very easy to find the phone number. So you can literally put your phone on speakerphone and like make your dinner and listen to this town hall, which is pretty cool. And then there are budget committee public presentation is what it calls it on this. But January 22nd to 23rd, each day, they're doing different subcommittee meetings where residents can come and depute directly to 3 of the councillors that are on the budget committee. So for us, we'll be at Etobicoke and Scarborough. So we have Scarborough on the 22nd, Etobicoke on the 23rd, and then I think City Hall is the 22nd, and North York is the 23rd. And so all the information about how to depute is online. Basically, if you want to go in person, you have 5 minutes to share your thoughts with the budget committee directly, which means getting your hopes and dreams on the record, which is really cool. So that's always an option as well. And if you can't make it in person, you can always email. So that all passes. Budget committee wraps up on the 26th. And then by February 1st, the mayor comes back and proposes her budget. We have about 2 weeks to mull that over. And then there's a special city council meeting on the 14th, which last year went till 11:30 p.m. So it is a real conversation point. There's a lot of like give and take. So if you somehow have the day off on the 14th, you can watch that on YouTube and it's kind of fun. And then throughout this whole process, if you don't have time to come out to the depute, you don't have time to call into the town hall, you can always contact your city councillor because they're your representative. They're the person who should be listening to what their residents want, what questions their residents have, which actually I think is my next slide. What should I write or talk about? Things that are really useful to us are hearing about specific projects, programs, or priorities you want to make sure are funded, or you want to make sure they're not funded. So if you're like, you know, I've been really closely following like the Reconciliation Action Plan, and I just want to make sure that these actions are like adequately funded to make them happen in 2024. That's like extremely useful, specific questions, and it puts on our radar something that when we're looking at the full-on budget, you know, we may or may not be looking that closely at that specific thing that's important to you. So yeah, specific concerns or questions you want your representatives to look into. And then it's still always valuable to share your needs, priorities, and values for the city as a resident of Toronto, because even if there isn't necessarily an opportunity to reflect that in the budget now, it's always helpful as a city councillor to understand what your residents want to see, because you might think about that through the year. And let's say you listen to me talk this whole time and you're still like, I want to go deeper. The city posts budget notes, which go into operating budget, capital budget, equity impacts of changes to the service levels, what's the word? Metrics for how they performed last year, challenges and opportunities for the year going forward, just like quite in depth. And they're for every single division, every single agency, every single corporation. So anything you want to know may or may not be in the budget note, but there's a good chance that something is in there about it. And I'm going to leave that little QR code up for a second in case you want to go deep, but I'll also share that link later on Slack. And I think that's my whole, yay, that's me. Everything that I shared is available on Toronto.ca/budget. You can also, if you have any questions, reach out to me on Slack. I'll do my best, but I also am like very busy this week. I'm not gonna lie to you. But I am like very excited to have this opportunity to like get some of Civic Tech people really more engaged in the city budget, because it is a very cool, like, municipal stuff is where like things are really tangible and things really like matter. So that's me.
We're gonna do some Q&A. We definitely have some time for questions. So why don't we start online and ask if anybody has any questions? So drop a Q in the chat if you'd like to ask a question. Sam.
No one, no. Oh, Ben Coleman has a question for Sam. You're welcome to unmute, Ben.
Hi, I also have to go find a room that has a light on. You mentioned before about how the property tax rates are different for like apartments versus commercial versus like houses. And I know that for a long time, apartments, you pay more per square foot than you would if you owned a house. Do you know how close the city is to closing that gap? Because I know they've been trying to narrow it over time.
I don't know how close, but I can show you a couple of things. Let me share this again. So I think that you're talking about multi-residential, right? When you're talking about like purpose-built rental, I don't know the specifics, but you can see here it's like 0.967% versus 0.5. And I do know that the multi-residential increase is half of the residential, so it's an incremental closure, but I would not say we're close by any means.
Thank you.
Yeah, not at all.
Let's do a question.
No, go for it. Let's go back and forth. We've got a few more questions in the online chat too.
Perfect. So we're going to do a question in person now.
So I guess my question is, isn't the whole point, I just assume from just my background in accounting, isn't the idea though of taxing those sort of like apartment buildings or things like that because they're more revenue driven? They're like, isn't that, why would we want to necessarily close the gap between that and a residence?
Can people hear me? Okay, perfect. I actually don't know the answer to that. And I would invite Ben, if you have a little bit of context, to share a quick answer.
You want the answer to that?
Wait, I want to see if Ben is available. So I feel like
Yeah, sorry, I'm cooking. So if someone else has the answer, that would be better.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, Jim, but quick answer.
It's actually for.
Oops, I'm so sorry, Alex. I'm making you run around.
That's totally
Okay. It's actually fairly straightforward. Those taxes land on the renters. The people who actually pay those taxes are the tenants, and so yeah.
Awesome.
All right, let's go. Luke, can we get a question from online?
Absolutely. John Sprague.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sam. I'm particularly interested in the comment that we're going with 2016 valuations, and at some point I think I will bestir myself and see if I can figure out what the actual tax increase is, or what the actual rate would be if you factored in the increase in property values since 2016. But I was just wondering, is there any place where we could where it would be straightforward to get the way that the budget for municipal housing is being spent, since that is we've got people freezing to death on the streets right now. So that's the exact layout for what is allocated, for how what is allocated is being spent is kind of important.
Yeah, so my disclaimer here is that I'm not our office's housing expert, but I'm gonna share screen, just so you all can see me finding the budget notes. So I will tell you that I'm not sure these tabs are the most descriptive, so you might have to click through all of them and pray to find what you need, which is also a moment for anyone who's like really just like, I'm not looking to figure out the city's structure. Like, do reach out to your counselor and just ask that question directly. Which is to say, John, if you reached out, you would get me. And then I would ask my colleague, how do I find this information? But my guess would be like going into, and I don't know if these fall under corporate real estate management, which is CREM, which I think is in here somewhere. No, it's not. I don't know where that one is. Is it? I don't think so. But the housing secretariat should be in here, right? This is where I expose myself. So Toronto Shelter and Support Services is in here, so that's one element of the kind of housing spectrum, but I don't think that's what you're asking about. I am not sure. This is how you'll feel when you go to do this yourselves. Just like Control F, housing. Nope, not here either. Sorry, bear with me, John. So housing secretariat, I would look in here as well too. Corporate. No. Looking for there, corporate real estate management. It also might be in the capital budget and plan here as well. And we'll go through in the breakout one of the budget notes, but I will show you here like what a budget note looks like. So it has just an overview of what this department does, budget at a glance, kind of high level numbers of operating budget and capital plan, how well we're doing behind the numbers, some metrics around how well we're doing, experiences, successes, challenges and risks, priority actions, operating budget. But what you're actually looking for, John, is going to be line by line in the capital budget and plan for probably one of these divisions. But I'm once again not our housing person, so I can't be sure. I hope that answers. Also, if you do look into that 2016 scenario, let me know, because I'm dying to know and I haven't looked into it.
Thank you. Any questions in the room? Yeah, if you want.
Sorry for all of you online. We just have a little audio stuff to sort out here.
I'm the chair of Toronto Strong Towns, and I just want to know if anyone at the Toronto budget office is aware of, talks about the basic fact that houses cost far more than multi-residential to deliver services relative to their value, that those are financial sinkholes, suburban houses. Is that something that is understood, or you're in the meeting? They know that.
Yeah. I feel like it's not something I've heard said explicitly, but when you say it, it makes sense to me, if that makes sense. I didn't sit in on all the budget briefings. I sat in on only 7, so I haven't been that deep in it, so don't take my word for it. But it's a good point. Maybe a question from online? Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
Rohit.
Yeah, hi, Sam. Yeah, I'm also from Etobicoke.
Yay!
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions. So one is, how do you budget for something, say a risk mitigation or like say a disaster kind of thing? Because I could not find that in the slide. And I think I missed the second question. Anyway, you can go ahead with this one. Yeah.
Oh, good. I think division by division, they have different ways of managing that risk. So I know when we, like, for example, when we looked at the contract that just got put through, I think December for the new Etobicoke Civic Center, that risk was baked into that contract. When you look at like technology services, I know they have a whole disaster recovery project that's ongoing. So that's kind of how they've managed it. We also have the reserves, which are kind of backup money to spend on things that come up that we didn't anticipate. And then like, once again, not an economist, but we like iron out those numbers later on down the line and ideally put money back into the reserves. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, so basically, when you're dividing it among the different setups, then they basically take care of the risk on their side, as in it's like it's baked in like that.
I think so.
Okay.
I feel like that's like, if I were a city staff who knew better, I would give you a better answer.
Okay.
Like,
No
how do
worries.
we prepare for like major impacts like COVID? I truly
Yeah.
like don't know.
Yeah, but yeah, to the second question, I think it was so among the constituents, how does the money get divided? Like there will be some shared services, some will be say specific to certain communities, right? As in say Etobicoke is one. So how does that get divided? Is it based on population or something else?
So the property tax rate is consistent across the city. And so where that discrepancy in terms of what you're paying as a resident, it comes in either in the assessed property value of your home. So in different areas of the city, I would anticipate those are different. And then also, if you are looking at the rate supported programs like Toronto Water or solid waste management, those are depending on if you got like a little green bin or a little garbage bin or a big garbage bin or how much water you use. But otherwise, it's really the whole budget for the whole city. There's different priorities in different areas. Like for our ward, we really heard it around mechanical leaf collection. That was a service that was cut through the 2023 budget to align service levels across the city. And we really heard it from our residents in terms of like, this is a service that's only in Etobicoke because we need it in Etobicoke. We have a lot more leaves. So that is always like a balancing act that has to be done kind of on the budget side of things, but in terms of reflection in residents' property taxes, they won't really see it that way.
Thank you.
So that's why it is really important, like, especially if you live in the suburbs, like come out to these consultations, because we see across all year, we had the night economy review consultation, and we saw most of the responses in that consultation came in from downtown, which means that suburban voices were not reflected in those, which is like, it truly is a concern when we're not effectively consulting with the full city.
I guess the first is, I believe MPAC reassessments are done if a property changes hands or ownership changes since 2016. So that's the exception. Like if a property has been held just by a single owner, that hasn't been reassessed since 2016. But if it has changed hands, then it will have been reassessed.
Oh, I thought it was only if there was major, I don't know if I'm creating the word, but like major construction or demolition, but I wasn't aware of if it changes hands too.
I think so, yeah.
Interesting.
The second comment is, I think about the person who asked about shelter and housing. I think it's under two separate items. Under infrastructure development and growth services, there's a housing secretariat, I think. And then under community and social services, there's the Toronto Shelter and Support Services. So those two combined, I think, are the
Yeah, that would be my expectation. And the only reason that I included corporate real estate management is because I know part of our generational transformation of housing, I've already forgotten the item, but our, like, going forward, our housing plan to build more affordable housing includes city-led developments. So I think that might live with the real estate arm. So I think it might be under those three. Yeah. Although I don't know if we're like that far in the works with the city-led development. That was just like a November item, I think.
Luke, any questions on your end?
No more questions online.
We do have a question here in the back. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it.
Hello, I've got two questions. Not leading anywhere, just a question. I guess first chicken and egg, like, so, city planner. How does a city planner and the budget and sort of the strategic direction of where we want to go, how does that sort of work, or how is that viewed? It's just a really open-ended question, just curious. I have a service designer hat, so I always ask, always curious of these certain subjects.
Yeah, so you're saying you're a city planner, or?
No, I'm not. I'm just curious. I'm not a city planner. But
Yeah.
I was reading the paper that the city planner hired. I thought, like, it's kind of like the city plan, and so how does the plan and the budget fit together for like where we want to go over the next 50 years? Or is there not?
No, it's a good question. It's a question that I don't fully know the answer to, because my personal experience with the city planning division has been very much on a like development to development basis, and it's like at a lower level. Like I wasn't in touch with Greg Lintern when he was our like city planner. So my experience with that division is more at a neighborhood level, like how does this fit in with so I don't know to what extent they're consulted on like our vision for what the city looks like, but I would imagine they're in the conversations, but sorry, I don't have a clear.
Does anyone know? City planning does more physical
city planners is all about what is where. And most of that money is not from the city, whereas the budget is about what the city is actually spending on its own operations. So
Yeah, but I think it's asking more of like the conversations around like the strategic direction for the city, if the city planner is in the room for those. To which I don't know the answer, but I would expect that they would be in some of those conversations, because the city does have big assets coming up, like the new Etobicoke Civic Center that fit into that, like, because then that, not to come back to Etobicoke all the time, but it's all I know. The Etobicoke Civic Center fits into like our Transform TO goals. It also fits into our workforce management at the city. So it intersects with all of that. So I'd imagine when we're ironing out, like, I'm not ironing out, less of the ironing, more of the visioning. I think like the city planner, I would expect they're in the room for some of that, but couldn't tell you. Yeah, long story short, maybe.
I guess part of the question is, hey, okay, we need to get kids to play outside more, for example. Right? Okay, well that means we got to build more parks. Does it, or someone says, well, okay, either video game arcades or city parks. So like, how does that? And then obviously that's a big longer plan with the city planning.
Yeah.
I think it's anecdotal on this.
No, yeah. So that the two places I would look, sometimes the tricky thing is like you really need to know the background on items that have gone through council. And so that's when I would say like reach out to your councillor to say like, you know, my priority is like spaces for children to live and like be able to be in spaces for free. And to that I would say like the Toronto Public Library has been a really big, like we're expanding open hours next year. I say we because we're also on the library board. I say we a lot and you're never sure who it is. And then also you'll see that reflected in the capital projects for parks, forestry, and recreation. So you'll be able to like look and see if there's any upcoming projects near you, expansion of parks, new dogs off leash areas, things like that. And then your last example was arcades, right? And that no, but that's a really interesting one because that one actually just was at City Council, a change in bylaws around just cleaning up all the bylaws because we had this kind of mishmash of pre-amalgamation bylaws for regulating like nightclubs and the night economy, and we just cleaned all of that up. So you might actually see that reflected in the budget. That's like the funny thing, is all of these little dots actually connect sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Let's thank Sam again. So we're gonna wrap up this part of